they still refer to her as if she was an extension of her former colonizers. They still refer to Africa as Anglophone, to mean English-speaking countries. Even Nigeria is Anglophone, notwithstanding that not more than 20% of Nigerians actually speak English. In Senegal, they are referred to as Francophone, notwithstanding that not more than 20% of them speak French. In Mozambique and Angola, they refer to them as Lusophone, and I'm told they also refer to some of them as Arabophone. Africa is a continent that is always being referred to by others in names that she does not participate in choosing. But even if that were not so, Africa has also suffered the fate of being defined by others. When it was convenient to Europe and America, they referred to us as the Third World. When the Third World was not so sweet after all, they referred to us as underdeveloped countries. And when underdeveloped country was not sweet either, they referred to us as developing countries. We are always defined and referred to others by terms that are meant to silence us and paralyze us so that we do not appreciate what we are doing. I and you will remember that when African countries regained independence, all of them, all the leaders had clarity of mind. Even the ones that later changed and became monsters were clear in their mind. Sometimes, when I look at Africa from west to east, and I listen to the speeches that were made then, if you care to listen to Leopold Sédar Senghor in Senegal, or Houphouët-Boigny in Côte d'Ivoire, he was clear that Africa had to solve our problems of disease and hunger and ignorance. But it's not only Houphouët-Boigny that was clear, or Senghor. Modibo Keita was clear in Mali, as Amadou Ahidjo was clear in Cameroon. Here in Nigeria, you may or may not agree, but when I listen to the speeches at that time of Nnamdi Azikiwe, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, and even the Sultan of Sokoto, Ahmadu Bello, their clarity of mind on what Nigeria needed could not be contradicted even if you did not agree with them. When I go to Congo, the man for whom I am named was as clear as Christo Patrice Emery Lumumba. Even David Dacko in Central African Republic was clear, although he later turned into some kind of monster. But clarity was the watchword in those early days. When you went to East Africa, so clear was Apollo Milton Obote, Jomo Kenyatta, and Julius Kambarage Nyerere. And you went a little down, even Kamuzu Banda was clear, as was Kaunda. There was unanimity that Africa became independent so that she could solve our problems. But no sooner had we settled or started settling in our independence way than we started experiencing problems. First, the machinations of our erstwhile colonizers, the leaders who had clarity of mind, were removed. Sylvanus Olympio was no more in Togo. Modibo Keita was no more in Mali. In 1966, Osagyefo himself was no more in Ghana. Here in Nigeria, Nnamdi Azikiwe was no more. The Sultan of Sokoto and the Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa were no more and paid the ultimate price. Africa was bleeding. coup d'etats became the thing in Africa, and those who did not love Africa even said that coups were as frequent as breakfast in Africa, but I dare say that even breakfast did not exist on African tables. That is the Africa that we are talking about. An Africa that apparently regained independence but was still controlled from elsewhere. And there is something that you must acknowledge about the erstwhile colonizers. Even when they appear to let you become freedom, they create a body in which they claim that you are equal and free, but equality and freedom is never there. So all former British colonies are still part of the Commonwealth, where they are free, independent, and equal, but the Queen is the permanent head. The former French colonies also exist in a body that is run from France. The former Portuguese colonies also find themselves in that way. The umbilical cord between us and the colonizers was never cut. And when we try to cut it, we realize that the umbilical cord is made of steel. And when we bring tools to cut it, they create a bypass so that we are always linked. That is the reality of Africa. So that today when we talk about globalization, we ask ourselves, is Africa ready for globalization? Is Africa ready for the fourth industrial revolution, they ask? Africa existed during the first industrial revolution in 1760s. The world at that time merely meant Europe, went through the industrial revolution when they migrated from agriculture and they started using equipment and they were mechanized. That happened in Europe, it happened in the United States of America, it happened in Japan, and we are told that we missed the first industrial revolution. There was the second industrial revolution, where they were not just using the machines, but they had graduated a little. They were using not just steam engine, but even the steam itself was being used. We are told we missed the second industrial revolution. In the 1950s, when there was the third industrial revolution, with the world of digitization, we are told that we missed the third industrial revolution. We are now told that there is the fourth industrial revolution and that we must participate in it when we talk about robotics, when we talk about artificial intelligence, when we talk about the Internet of Things. We are told that Africa must participate, and that is another name for globalization. Is it a good thing, this thing called globalization? This thing called globalization means several things. It means, among other things, that our markets must now be open to the world. It means, among other things, that we have become equals in the world and that we can participate. But before I talk about that equality, permit me to take you through recent history of how Africa has been treated. I remember in 1970s and 1980s, the Europeans sat in Europe, and in their magnanimity, because they are ever magnanimous, in quotes unquote, they took the view that Africans and the Caribbeans and the Pacific needed an arrangement where their problems of poverty, hunger, and climate change ought to be addressed. And they sat down and in 1975 came up with the Lome Convention signed in Togo. The Lome Convention ran its course and Africa did not change. When the Lome Convention had run its circle in the year 2000, they sat again in Cotonou in Benin and came again with the Cotonou Convention. And once again, it ran its course, and the Cotonou Convention did not give birth to anything. In 1980, the World Bank and the IMF, the so-called Bretton Woods institution, sat in New York and said that Africans needed something called structural adjustment. Africa is always the laboratory of new ideas that are conceived by European economists in European universities, and they came here with structural adjustment programs, and they told government, you have no business being in business. African governments listened to them, and whether you are in Nigeria or in Nairobi, Kenya, or in Accra, Ghana, or in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, there was only one eloquent voice being heard from London, England, and from Washington, D.C., and from Paris, France, telling us, sell all your assets, sell your telecom companies, sell your power companies. We sold them, and they did not perform, and they went back to think of yet another experiment, and I suspect that that experiment is globalization. Why do I suspect that that experiment could be globalization? Because the Western world is never asleep. I remember under the aegis of the United Nations, and the United Nations is a good thing. But remember that when the United Nations organization was created in 1945 in San Francisco in the United States of America, none of the African countries were independent. We were not there. And remember that when they constituted the United Nations, they created something called the Security Council, and no African country sits at the Security Council. Remember that the world is structured in such a way that meetings are held in the world. The first meeting that is normally held is the G7. They were G8 until they expelled Russia. Now they are the G7. When they meet in Davos or they meet in Glen Eagles in Scotland, the 7 leaders of the most powerful economies in the world meet. Occasionally they invite the president of Nigeria because it is the most populous nation in Africa. Occasionally they invite the president of South Africa because it has a large economy. And they also invite the chairman for the time being of African Union. And the first and the last time that you see those presidents is at the photo op. After they have taken the photo on the first day, they are told, you go home. You go home. That is meeting number 1, the G7. Then there is another meeting of the G20. The G20 is a meeting where a few African countries may find themselves. Nigeria finds ourselves there. South Africa finds ourselves there. Occasionally Egypt finds ourselves there. Sometimes Algeria finds ourselves there. But their participation is minimal. Then there is another meeting of the rest, which all the 54 African countries belong to. I am submitting to us that at the dinner table where serious things are discussed, Africa is always under the table picking the crumbs and assuming that the party is under the table while the real party is on the table. I'm submitting to us that when we talk about globalization, we must ask ourselves, could globalization mean what I'm suggesting it means? But let us ask ourselves, when we talk about the challenges and the promises of globalization, let us ask ourselves what it is that we are talking about. When we talk about globalization, we are saying that the world has become one. We are saying, as the great South Korean writer Ha Jun Chang has written in his book, The Bad Samaritans, we are saying that globalization means that when an item is produced in China, that item should find its way in Nouakchott in Mauritania without any barriers. We are saying that when we talk about globalization, there is one market. We are saying that when we talk about globalization, our borders disappear. We are saying that when we talk about globalization, we are talking about the dissolution of borders, and we are talking about the death of time, because technology now allows us almost to travel instantaneously. The question is Africa prepared for that thing? You know, several years ago, in 1980 to be exact, the former Tanzanian President Julius Kambarage Nyerere was asked the question, do you believe that African countries should play as equal players in the world economic arena? Because Europe and America now say, after the WTO rules, that the rules and the field has been made level. This is what Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere said. He said that in boxing, the boxers are divided into several categories. There are heavyweight boxers, there are light heavyweight boxers, there are bantamweight boxers, there are featherweight boxers, but the rules of boxing are the same. If you take a heavyweight boxer and put him in the same ring with a lightweight, on the argument that the rules are the same, that is not boxing, that is murder. I am submitting to us that whenever we are told that the rules are the same, we are being invited to commit suicide. Because, ladies and gentlemen, tell me, if the President of the United States of America, whose economy has a GDP of $14 trillion, invites the President of Burundi, whose GDP is $2 billion, for a bilateral agreement, even if there are 21 gun salutes, even if there is a red carpet, it is not a meeting of equals. That is the reality. And yet we are being told that the United States of America is a sovereign state, and Burundi is a sovereign state, and I agree. I'm being told that Germany is a sovereign state, and Sao Tome and Principe is also a sovereign state. I'm being told that Benin is a sovereign state, and France is also a sovereign state, and therefore they are meeting on an equal and a level playing field. If Africa is invited to such a boxing match, and Africa is not one, sometimes Africa is presented as if it was a single country. No, it is not. I am therefore submitting to us that we must interrogate ourselves whenever we are told that the field is level. But there is something unique about Africa. Why do I say there is something unique about Africa? People are always meeting about Africa to define Africa and to define what Africa needs. They met in Berlin in 1884 and divided Africa. They never stopped there. Today, everybody is meeting about Africa. The Chinese meet in Beijing, and they invite our leaders to Beijing. Why are they inviting us? Is it because they love us so much? I doubt. Why is it that once China has invited us to Beijing, Japan also invites us to Tokyo? Is it because we are so beautiful that we are loved by everybody? I doubt. Why is it that once we have been invited to Japan, we are also invited to Washington? Is it because we are so beautiful that nobody can resist us? Why is it that when Washington has finished with us, Europe also invites us to Brussels. Are we so beautiful that we cannot be resisted? And why are we so beautiful that even Russia now invites us? Are we so beautiful that the next person to invite us will be the Arab countries in Doha, in Qatar? We must ask ourselves why we are being invited. As you are asking yourself, I know why we are being invited. We are being invited because Africa is the home of the things that everybody wants. Everybody knows that Africa has all the things that are desirable. And if you doubted that Africa had everything, you start to look at your African map. If you want gold, you go to Johannesburg, South Africa. In fact, the other name of Johannesburg is Igoli, which means gold. If you want diamonds, you climb a little and go to Namibia and to Botswana and to Lesotho, and you find diamond there. And if you want uranium, you just go to Zimbabwe. And if you are tired of looking at uranium in Zimbabwe, you climb the ladder a little and you go to Zambia and you are confronted with copper. And if you are tired of copper, just rise to the Democratic Republic of Congo and you'll ask yourself the question, what was God thinking when he created Congo? What mineral is not there? Everything is in Congo except nothing. That is Africa for you. And when you move out of Congo, you go to the armpit of Africa. As if things can only be hidden in the armpit, you find oil in Equatorial Guinea and you find oil in Angola. And as if oil was condemned to reside in that part of the world, you find oil off the shores of Gabon. You find oil off the shores of Benin. You find oil off the shores of Cameroon. You find oil off the shores of Nigeria. You find oil off the shores of Ghana. And if you are tired of oil and you now want to go into agriculture, you go to Ghana, and when you are looking for cocoa and before you see cocoa, you meet gold. And if you rise a little up there, you go to Cote d'Ivoire, you meet cocoa. And if you are tired of West Africa and you go to West Africa, come to my Kenya, you meet tea, you meet coffee, and you go to Tanzania and to Ethiopia. What did God not put in Africa? That is the continent that everybody wants. That is the continent that they say must now embrace globalization. That is the continent that they now say that continent must open our borders. We know it when they tell us to open our borders, and we are being told that is a game of recourse. I refuse to accept. You know, I do not claim the monopoly of knowledge or wisdom, but I know a few things. And one of the things that I know is what globalization should not mean. I know two things, what globalization should not mean and what globalization should not mean. Globalization should not mean that when fish is produced in China, the fish should be marketed in my rural village in Kenya to the detriment of our fishermen. If that is what globalization, we must reject globalization. I refuse to believe that when globalization means that when I want to take a taxi in Lagos, Nigeria, or in Accra, Ghana, there must be an application by somebody sitting in Tallinn, in Estonia, or San Francisco in the United States, running companies called Taxify or Bolt or Uber. If that is what globalization means, then I don't want globalization. If globalization means that when I am at the airport in Nnamdi Azikiwe Airport in Abuja, or Muritala Mohammed in Lagos, Nigeria, or Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, or Tambo in South Africa, that my food must be prepared and my things must be run by Swissport from Switzerland, if that is what globalization means, then I do not like globalization. If globalization means that Nigeria can produce oil, but that oil cannot be refined in Nigeria, it must be taken by Mobil, by Moxie, by Exxon, by Total, by Elf, then that is not the globalization that I desire. I refuse to accept a globalization that says that diamond is produced in Namibia, in Lesotho, in Botswana, in Sierra Leone, and in Liberia, but the price of diamond is determined in Antwerp in Belgium. I refuse that globalization. I refuse a globalization that says that cocoa is produced in Nigeria. It is produced in Accra in Ghana. It is produced in Cote d'Ivoire, but the largest coffee producers are Cadbury in the United States of America, in the United Kingdom, and the largest producers of chocolate are to be found in Switzerland, Godiva, Ferrero, and Lindt. I refuse that globalization. I refuse a globalization that says that when I want to send my letter, it must be DHL based in Bonn in Germany. I refuse that globalization. I refuse a globalization that tells me that when I'm moving money from Ota to Lagos, it must be G4S in the United Kingdom that tells me and provides me with the means of protecting my money. That is the kind of globalization that is being talked about.